Welcome to Freethought Matters. I'm Dan Barker. I'm the co-president of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which produces this show.
And I'm Laurie Gaylor, co-president and co-founder of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, which is a national organization of freethinkers, atheists and agnostics, working to keep religion out of government. We would invite you to become a member of FFRF by visiting ffrf.org. And you can also request a sample of our newspaper, Freethought Today.
Our guests today are the power couple intellectuals, Steven Pinker and Rebecca Newberger Goldstein. Rebecca is a philosopher, a professor at Barnard, whose many novels and books include Betraying Spinoza, the renegade Jew who gave us modernity, 36 Arguments for the Existence of God, a work of fiction, and Plato at the Googleplex, Why Philosophy Won't Go Away. Rebecca writes for many leading publications, and among her numerous accomplishments, including receiving the MacArthur Genius Award, she was awarded the National Humanities Medal by President Obama in a ceremony at the White House. But I think most important, she's an honorary board member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
And Steve Pinker is the honorary president, and he is the Johnstone Family Professor of Psychology at Harvard. He's also taught at Stanford and MIT. He was named one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in the world. He's chair of the usage panel of the American Heritage Dictionary. Steve also writes for many leading publications and is the author of many best-selling books, including The Blank Slate, The Better Angels of Our Nature, and most recently, Enlightenment Now, The Case for Reason, Science, Humanism, and Progress. So Steve and Rebecca, thank you for joining us today.
Nice to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So what's it like for two scholars being locked up, sheltering at home during this coronavirus?
We've alternated between conversations about lofty topics of the kind that we tend to get absorbed in, on the nature of morality and why people believe crazy things, and the mundane details of surviving under lockdown. Masks should we wear? How many different kinds of disinfectants should we bring when we go to the post office or on our biweekly trip to the supermarket?
Is it hard to get your work done? Can you study? Can you research at home?
Yeah, I mean, the internet is a fantastic thing. So, years ago, I would have had to be living in the library in order to continue with the work. But it's, yeah, everything is available. It is, I can't say that it's as easy to work as possible. It's extremely distracting times that we're living in. And so it's, you know, work days are blighted given the circumstances. But we're very lucky because we are in a place where it's very uncrowded here, and so you know, I can walk for miles on the beach. We're here in Cape Cod, and not see anybody. So massive, relieved.
So Steve, your most recent books, The Better Angels of Our Nature and Enlightenment Now, they're very optimistic books. And I want to ask you, has your optimism moderated at all in the last couple of months?
Actually, I don't consider either book to be a brief for optimism. It's really an argument for what Hans Rosling, the late Swedish doctor, called factfulness. It's not a question of seeing the glass as half full. It's a question of making people aware of things that they really did not know, such as the rate of death in warfare has fallen by a factor of 20 since the early 1950s, such as that extreme poverty has declined by 75% in the last 30 years. So it's not a question of optimism to remind people of fact, or to actually inform people of things that they did not know in the first place. And of course, it is the fact that we have made progress in particular areas does not mean that nothing bad will ever happen again. If we've made progress, it is not because the universe has anything called progress. There's no force that just carries us ever upward. It's because humans use their ingenuity to solve problems, and that the problems that they try to solve, problems concerning human well-being. If we try to reduce poverty and disease and violence, every now and again we can succeed. And if we hang on to the things that work and get rid of the things that don't work, then we can make uneven but genuine progress.
And so the thesis of Enlightenment now is that, of course, Enlightenment works, science, reason, progress. So can we take a look at how things might be better during this pandemic than in previous pandemics?
Well, yes, it is a sad fact about human nature that we tend to respond to palpable circumstances, to available images and anecdotes and narratives, and often abstract knowledge about the risks we face just goes in one ear and out the other. So now that we're reminded that when scientists say bad things can happen, they can happen, it's certainly gotten the world's attention. And one hopes that just as after 9/11, there's a Department of Homeland Security created almost overnight, in that case, actually in response to a fairly trivial risk, because terrorism kills very few people outside of war zones. But one would hope that as a result of this crisis, we would have a Department of Pandemic Preparedness, or at least an infrastructure in place, early detection of possible pandemics from across the globe, stockpiles of protective equipment, and a research and manufacturing infrastructure that can make vaccines on short notice. They might sit around a lot of the time unused in the same way that our fire departments sit around with firefighters, feeding their Dalmatians or whatever they do. A typical fire department has put itself out of business. They respond to fires once every 2 years. And that's a success story. No one wants to shut down fire departments just because they've been so successful. And one hopes that a greater public health infrastructure will result from our being reminded of how bad things can get.
Well, yeah, you would hope so. You would hope we would learn something from this. I think many states are going to be thinking about preparedness for the future. Let's get some of those supplies ready, some of the PPE and all of that. But that comes from reason. That comes from obeying the rational stay at home, for example, and staying away from church, for goodness sake. Rebecca, you were raised in a sheltered, repressive Jewish type of upbringing. What can you tell us about the mindset of these? It was just last week, wasn't it, when the Jews went to this big funeral in New York City and they disobeyed the ordinances and they all went to a mass funeral? What's going through their minds that they would risk public health like that?
I don't know that I have any special insight into that. I was brought up in a family and a community that constantly baffled me, so I don't know I've ever really understood it. I think, there is sometimes, I suppose one of the great reasons for believing in religion is feeling that one has a special kind of protection, that there's a God who's controlling everything, and you're particularly pleasing him, and therefore by doing the things that you think are going to please him, you are somehow upping the odds of your own safety. And I think in this particular funeral in Brooklyn last week, it was as I take it, a very prominent rabbi, a charismatic rabbi. And so I think there was probably a great outpouring of respect and love. And also in that particular group, the Hasidim, there's the sense that these spiritual leaders have special powers themselves, and so they will intercede on high for these followers. And so you have to send him off, showing that you make you're showing him the proper respect, and so he'll intercede. I perhaps, that this is the kind of supernatural beliefs that were going on.
Well, you could give us some insight, I think, into what would Aristotle do in a pandemic. You had a fascinating article a few weeks ago in the Wall Street Journal from a philosophical point of view. Could you tell us more about that?
Yeah, I find trying to understand how Aristotle might react easier than how my fellow co-religionists would respond sometimes. Yeah, I have been asked by the Wall Street Journal to look at three particular philosophers, Aristotle, John Stuart Mill, and Immanuel Kant, and what they might have to offer us in these times of pandemic. And the reason that the Wall Street Journal had chosen that is that those three philosophers are representative of the three major philosophical moral theories that are still in play: virtue, ethics, that's Aristotle; John Stuart Mill would be utilitarianism, and Kant is a deontological theory. So it was a very erudite choice on their part. Not necessarily the philosophers I would have chosen. As you probably know, I would have chosen Spinoza, my favorite philosopher. But yeah, so it was this exercise, and John Stuart Mill, utilitarianism, and trying to do the greatest good for the greatest number. Kant was an interesting, it was an interesting example. I used it, his categorical imperative that you have to maximize that you're working under. You have to be able to maximize it for everybody. You have to see if it's truly moral, as an argument against hoarding toilet paper or hoarding anything else. So I mean, one could apply these. Very helpful, and I think here I'm different from many philosophers, but I actually think that all of these approaches to moral theory, virtue ethics, utilitarianism, and Kantianism are not contradictory, but they're mutually reconcilable, so that they're very important lessons to be drawn from all of them approaches, but they are basically getting at the same moral truths.
You did tend to settle on Aristotle's, what you call the virtue of munificence, giving praise to those people who go above and beyond, the healthcare workers and all of that, who, for whatever reason, are trying to minimize the damage.
Yeah, I like Aristotle's virtue ethics very much. And it's this notion of, look, we want to cultivate our virtues because it makes us, it's in our self-interest. It makes us better people. And munificence, this sort of just givingness of whatever one has to give, appropriately at the right time, in the right amount, that this is, is just one of the ways that we can perfect ourselves. I didn't get into this in the essay, because, word limit and all that. But Aristotle particularly applies it to leaders, the importance of munificence in leaders, and having this kind of virtue where you want to give. And of course, I knew where the Wall Street Journal would stop me if I went too far with that.
So religion does not have a corner on morality, is what you're saying. We have to take a break now. We're going to take a break for about 90 seconds, and when we come back, we're going to ask both of you what you're working on now. So stay tuned. I'm Dan Barker with Laurie Gaylor. Stay tuned for more Freethought Matters.
Hi, I'm Ron Reagan, an unabashed atheist, and I'm alarmed by the intrusions of religion into our secular government. That's why I'm asking you to support the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest and most effective association of atheists and agnostics, working to keep state and church separate, just like our founding fathers intended. Please support the Freedom from Religion Foundation. Ron Reagan, lifelong atheist, not afraid of burning in hell.
Thank you for watching Freethought Matters. You can find more content by the Freedom from Religion Foundation at our website, ffrf.org. Follow FFRF on Facebook, and you'll get notifications about all of our content, including whenever we go live on FFRF's Ask an Atheist. FFRF is also on YouTube, where all of our programs, including this show and our weekly news bites, are available to watch anytime. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you on the web.
And welcome back to Freethought Matters. I'm Dan Barker with Laurie Gaylor. We are co-presidents of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. We're talking with our favorite intellectuals, Steven Pinker and Rebecca Newberger Goldstein. We have all of their books in our library here at Freethought Hall. I was going to bring them in here to the studio, but I couldn't find a wheelbarrow. You guys have written so much stuff that it's like a whole shelf of our books. So thanks for joining us today. And Rebecca, you were going to ask her a question about him.
Well, yes, this is called Freethought Matters. And of course, when we named the show, Rebecca, we thought of you and have always wanted to have you on the show. We thought we'd be flying you in here. Glad to have you remotely. But you have a very interesting philosophical concept called mattering. Could you briefly explain that?
Yeah, I think matter is just such a fascinating word, such a fascinating concept. The polyphony of it, the double meanings of it. Matter is the stuff of the universe. And then there's the verb, to matter. And basically the way I understand it, it's a hard word to unpack, but the way I'm basically understanding is it's things that matter are deserving of attention. So it's a kind of moral concept, what we ought to pay attention to. It has that word ought in it. It's got obligations in it. So it's, that's basically the way I understand it. We apply the notion of mattering to both things and to people. Who matters, what makes for a life that matters, I think is one of the most fundamental questions that we all ask. Religion tries to get at it, philosophy tries to get at it. Mattering matters to us tremendously. We all want to matter. We all want to feel that we are deserving of attention.
So what obviously matters to both of you is writing, researching and writing. Can you both tell us what you're working on now? Is it a secret, or can you give us a hint on what your next project is?
Okay. Well, for the last few months, I've been teaching a new course in Harvard's general education curriculum called Rationality. It combines tools for rational thinking, like logic and probability and game theory and Bayesian reasoning and signal detection theory, just intellectual tools that I think every rational person should command. Everyone should know what tragedy of the commons is. Everyone should know what the fallacy of affirming the consequent means. Combined with research from my own field, cognitive psychology, why people don't often seem so rational, made famous by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in their groundbreaking work that Kahneman reported on in Thinking Fast and Slow. And then I combined it with a number of guest lecturers who working in fields where they applying rational evidence-based approaches to topics that are often just matters of opinion and advocacy and ideology, from crime to policy to climate change to philanthropy. Anyway, it attracted enough interest that I decided to convert my next book project to the subject, and so my next book will be called Rationality. What it is, why it's scarce, how to get more.
My favorite book of yours is The Blank Slate. It still is, and it looks like this is kind of a sequel to that.
In some ways, although it follows up on the Good Ideas chapter in How the Mind Works. Yeah. Namely, how do we ordinarily reason about cause and effect, and what implies what, and what's likely to happen? How do we compare human intuition against our best models from logic and mathematics and probability theory and so on?
Well, that sounds wonderful. I'd love to take your course, and now I know I can read the book. So that would be
Someday.
something to look forward to. And Rebecca, what about you?
Well, interestingly enough, I'm writing on mattering. Let me see. It's a book that starts with physics, goes to biology, tracing our striving to matter, our great pursuit to matter, from the beginning, from the second law of thermodynamics, our need to concentrate all our energy on keeping from entropically falling apart, and then it's change of scene to the genes, where that comes the actions of the genes, and then upward through human psychology and our capacity for self-reflection, and our being able to sort of step away from this pursuit of our life and ask for what, really, what is it for? What is it? Am I living a life that is worthy of a human being to live? Is it all absurd? This is the place that I call them the 4 a.m. variety of self-reflection. You know, what is it? It is when you're confronting the absurdity of life, and then how we go on from there. The many varieties of ways that people have of pursuing their mattering, some of them constructive and expansive and life-affirming, and some of them destructive and undermining of other people's pursuit of mattering. And I end up with a different way of approaching moral philosophy. So it starts with physics, goes to biology, psychology, sociology, political theory, a little bit of economics, and ends in moral, a new way of looking at moral theory.
I'm going to
And
need
then
a
I can die.
bigger.
I'll be done. This is everything I've ever wanted to think about.
We're going to need a bigger wheelbarrow, I think. We have your book, 36 Arguments for the Existence of God, and the subtitle is important, A Work of Fiction. We have a couple minutes left. Would you guys mind if we did a little lightning rod, like
Lightning round.
lightning round of either way, arguments for God, and then you can maybe bounce back on them?
Sure. It's been a while since I wrote that book.
It has, but you still have a brain. So nature shows evidence of design. Look at the human eye. How can there be design without a designer?
Yeah, well, we've got the theory of evolution the theory of natural selection to dismantle that argument. Step-by-step cumulative processes over 4 billion years, basically, that mutations occur and replications occur, and then the theory of natural selection goes to town on that. So there is the appearance of design, but we can explain it away, and that's exactly what the theory of natural selection does.
Well, how can we be good without God?
How can we be good with God? No, that's
How can we be good with God?
it's now that's one of my favorite arguments, and it was an argument that meant an awful lot to me when I was growing up as a religious little kid. It was I was reading all these science books, so I could see how theory of natural selection could do away with the argument from design, and I saw what was wrong with the cosmological argument, the argument for first cause, all of that. But morality, it's so mysterious because it seems to be not empirical, so it seems to be sort of transcendent. And that is when I read Bertrand Russell's Why I Am Not a Christian. My parents didn't mind my reading that book because we were Jewish. They didn't want me to be Christian, right? So it was fine to read that book. And he dismantles that argument so beautifully, and actually goes back to Plato. He was plagiarizing. Bertrand Russell was plagiarizing Plato. And it's basically, look, either God had a reason for choosing the moral rules or he didn't. If he has a reason, that's the reason. We don't need God. He's redundant. He had a reason. That's the reason. Let's discover it. And God is out of the picture. Or he had absolutely no reason at all. It's just arbitrary, whim, his whim, caprice. How does that answer our question about morality? It's just a beautifully elegant argument.
So we have about 30 seconds. Steve, here's a fastball for you. Going back to Aristotle, everything that's moving was put into motion. So there must have been a prime mover. How do you explain that?
Well, the laws of physics seem to do just fine without a prime mover, and the great contribution of Galileo was that we live in a clockwork universe where laws act going forward. They don't direct themselves towards some end. Organisms do, machines do, but not the laws of nature.
I wish we had more time.
Yes.
We're out of time.
Well, for Rationality, Enlightenment Mattering, we are very honored that you joined us today. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, and congratulations for all the great work you do.
Yes.
And thank you for watching Free Thought Matters, because
Free thought matters.
Hi, I'm Steve Pinker. In my book, Enlightenment Now, I show that the world has become a better place as reason has been overcoming superstition and tribalism. But the values of the Enlightenment are under attack. That's why I'm a proud member of the Freedom from Religion Foundation, the nation's largest association of free thinkers working to keep state and church separate. Please join me in supporting the Freedom from Religion Foundation to ensure that our government is driven not by religion, but by reason.